Hello everyone. This brief workshop on secondary data at Key Stage 4 and Post 16 is intended for anyone in schools to be able to use, for senior leaders, to be shared with middle leaders, to be shared with governors if you wish. The purpose is to brief everyone on the All Wales core data sets, but also the rich range of data that's available within schools as well. But All Wales core data sets will be at the core, but then a very brief overview of the ALPS data that's available. It's not a full ALPS workshop where you would need to go into much more detail, but there'd be an overview of that for post 16. If you do wish to record your attendance at this session, so it can be logged against school, then do so using the QR code if you're watching the video. It's the same link to all of our attendance, and with the course code AWCDS Key Stage 4, although we will be talking about Key Stage 5 in here as well, briefly. So, early analysis. We're well aware that within schools there's a broad, rich range of information available from GCSE results day, and as well as the GCSE results data, there's the range of vocational qualifications that you get as well within school. There's an example on this screen of some of the questions that I'm sure you will want to consider. These are particularly useful for senior leaders and governors as well, to give an overview and a feel for highlights and analysis of early information on groups of learners, early analysis on comparison with subjects, and your own professional predictions, obviously not the statutory targets that were once in place. Are there any strengths? Are there any disappointments? Are there any surprises in terms of the performance? And how will this in early stages influence your priorities moving forward? And then how, as middle leaders predominantly throughout the school, do you consistently use, for example, the item level analysis that's available from the WJC, and how will it be used formatively to influence practice within the school? And how can that practice be shared as well? Are there any departments that are analysing data particularly well that could share that with others? So moving on from that early data available through September, within September as well, the AS, we will in your hub folders put an early analysis for you as well in terms of the data that WJC make available for us. There are a lot of health warnings on that data, and that it's summer series only. It's not anything related to the Welsh Government measures at pupil level, no vocational data included, and your entry policies may affect things like numeracy, literature, science, etc. It's also not possible to calculate those measures until the All Wales core data sets come out. One example of how that rich range of data could be used, there's a lovely example here from science within a single school, and the data over a number of years. When you look at the Double Science Award individually, you can see that performance, if you look at A star and A star to C, has declined over that period of time. So something more unusual there going on than just cohort variation and changes. But interesting that the number of learners undertaking that double award science fallen by about 100 of entries, so 50 learners across the cohort because it's double entry. Then, interestingly, when you look at the single level sciences, there's an increase in entry patterns, but again, there's a decline there as well. A pretty early conclusion to that when you look at it is the entry policy for that school within science has changed. So you have the top end of those learners who would have been doing the double science awards entered for the single sciences, but they're generally less able than the cohorts that were doing those before. So that may have impacted particularly the A star to A rate, but it doesn't seem to have significantly impacted the A star to C rate. And perhaps those single sciences are what's ultimately best for the individual learner. So a brief little example of that early data there on the GCSEs only. For the All Wales core data sets, there's a couple of the key changes there highlighted in red from the return of those when the then Minister announced them in January that they would be returning in a similar form to before. We obviously now have 2 years. We've also been told by Welsh Government that the families are refreshed for 2023. However, when we've looked at and compared across 23-24, not a single school in Wales has changed position apart from those that no longer exist. So we believe it's the same data ultimately. It's also worth saying sixth form data, attainment data, and the comparable measures will come much later in March as per last year. You have, and this is in the packs, and we will put this data, make this data available for schools. The old families from 2019. You've got the new families updated for 2024 with any changes highlighted in yellow or green, and you've got the position of the families. You've got the 6 Welsh medium families. You'll see where the 3 schools in the region are on the left, and you've got the number from 7 to 21 of the English medium families on the right. So you've got that data available, and that's publicly available information. It's worth a reminder, there is no change to how families are calculated compared with 2011 when they first came in. It is predominantly 50% based on free school meals. It's 30% based on Wales Index of Multiple Deprivation, individual learner and where they live in terms of postcode data, 10% on IDPs or statements of special educational needs. Note the language there is special educational needs, not additional learning needs, and 10% on who are either new to English language or Welsh where relevant. So relatively small proportions of those two categories. It says 3-year average of data from PLAS 2021 to 23, which is correct because we don't see any 24 data in there. Families then of 9 to 10 schools who you are then have comparative information for. Worth a reminder of the 5 measures: the CAP 9, the literacy measure, the numeracy measure, the science measure, and the Welsh Baccalaureate Skills Challenge Certificate. But then there are those additional measures of A star to A performance, lots and lots of gender differentials and EFSM, non-EFSM used on eligibility, and then the actual results against model performance, which I will explain a little bit later, although I'm sure many of you completely understand what those mean. And then you do have individual grade distributions and the real detail at the end for individual departments to consider. And the comparison against thirds in terms of performance within school. You also have calculating points values. Just a reminder, I know that the booklets that you have here are far more important and far more detailed than you have here, but you do have the grade tables here. On a very simplistic level, it is interesting to note that for GCSE, the largest gap is between 0 and 16 points, as opposed to the individual grades, which are only between 6 points. So the old system, which really valued getting C's and above, it now equalizes the value of every grade for every learner, but it does maximize those getting a minimum level of qualification. You've got a couple of very simplistic examples on the right hand side of vocational qualifications which are available to you. So you've got those there, which will help you understand the difference between the two. What you then have as the main measure, I'm sure you're all familiar with this, is the CAP 9. Used to be a time when it was more than 9 qualifications and any qualifications could count, but it was capped some time ago, probably about 2012, I think. The 2018 model is of interest, where you had 5 qualifications which were prescribed and 5 slots, as I call them, which are prescribed of English language, Welsh language, maths numeracy, the 2 sciences, and then open choices on any other, including vocational. In 2019 and retained into 2023, which continues into 2024, you have the prescriptions on the literacy, numeracy and science, and complete flexibility then on 2/3 of the curriculum offered. There are at the bottom of that slide a couple of examples of the points values, and you can see the maximum there of 9 slots. 9 A stars would calculate at 58 points each, and 9 equals 522. You've also got the example of a balance of vocational qualifications and GCSEs, and you can see the points level qualifications there. So what does this look like at school level in terms of the charts? Interesting that the complete packs are voluminous, to say the least, at approximately 120 pages. I'm not going through all of those. And after you've been through one set of charts, it is pretty much a little bit like Groundhog Day in terms of repeating exactly the same principles. They have a 0.0x numbering system, so I've used that rather than page numbers, because we have noticed in between different years a couple of extra pages can get inserted in, which messes up the numbering system on this training. So first page that I would look at as if I was a leader in a school as the overall is the summary of all indicators. I'll explain these in terms of what they mean against the modelled. The modelled is not as sophisticated as perhaps it sounds. It basically means against the line of best fit across Wales. The difference, basically, 23.8 points above is roughly the equivalent to half a GCSE. The reason I say it's equivalent to half a GCSE is because 54 points is the maximum of a grade difference across the 9 subjects. Therefore, halfway there, 23 points, it's slightly less in this case. Then you've got the Cap 9 as by thirds, which I'll explain on a subsequent slide. You've then got the skills challenge certificate indicator. You've then got the 3 literacy, numeracy, science indicators. Those are roughly the equivalent of 6 points difference between each grade. So if 6 points difference, that would mean that every single learner in the cohort was above or below by 6 points. You can see here, literacy means it's above by approximately a quarter of a grade. Numeracy approximately a third of a grade, science approximately a quarter of a grade. You've then got the science, which is purely on percentages. So you can see here 80% above. So you can see this school, 26% of learners get 5 A stars to A's compared with their expected of 17. That's quite a significant difference. That's your summary. Say I have put page numbers on that, which is 16 to 17, and those are available there. So at this stage, in analysing the remainder of the pack, broad questions to consider. I won't cover everyone, but what's the chart telling you? Why is it important? And I think it's vital that there is no leaping to conclusions here. It's asking questions, querying the data, and I've got a range of some of those reflective questions to answer there, which are within the packs anyway. There is one more contextual data, and this gives you free school meals, and this is no change from before, where you do have the free school meal position within the school, and in secondary schools, the boundaries they use, you don't have benchmarks included, but they're used for attendance, up to including 10%, between 10 and 15, between 15 and 20, between 20 and 30, greater than 30. Set some time ago, because at the time there were roughly equal number of secondary schools in each group, or almost the way I talk about them as division in terms of perhaps leagues where you compared with those in a similar school, or used to be in the old days anyway. So these are the key charts for this. Happens to be the Cap 9, but they're repeated for every indicator. The key point to realise is that your school is the pink dot in the middle. Other schools within the family are the blue dots, and the family average is the orange dot. Whilst the charts are not that well labelled in terms of X and Y axis in these, 0 up to 60% and then 0 up to 500 points on the Cap 9. It's truncated quite high at 300, so you don't get the full height of the chart that you would if it wasn't truncated. The line of best fit across is as if every school in Wales were there. So that line, you imagine you've got your 10 in your family, but there are still another 200 dots in the background of that, which is where the line is drawn. There are some vague confidence lines around there, which shows that confidence decreases at particularly low free school meals and higher free school meals in terms of the line of best fit between every school. You've then got the data on the right hand side, which is the table of data for every school. These charts look quite complex when you first see them, but they are basically the cohort split into 3 by performance. So if you've got a cohort of 150 learners, the 50 highest performing on the Cap 9 would be represented in the top line. The middle 50%, or the dot around the line, the middle 50 would be in the middle dot, and the lowest 50 in terms of performance would be on the lowest dot. Our school in this example has an upper third with the dark blue well above the line, yellow in the middle third well above the line, and the other purple colour there well above that line. The reason I almost got confused was because that lowest dot is actually from the other middle third above. So in our particular school, our lowest performing third are doing as well as the middle performing third in one school in the next. So that's quite a significant difference. I would be concerned, particularly if I was this school, which has this dot, has the lowest dot here, and has the lowest dot here. They're all vertically aligned on the thirds because they're the same free school meals ultimately. What we notice when we see the schools is that schools tend to be grouped together for the most able third, most highest performing third, grouped together pretty much for the middle third, but then there is significant variance for pupils in the lowest third in a lot of schools. And I think this perhaps feeds into a situation where you consider that schools make the greatest difference for our most vulnerable learners, and the data seems to reflect that, or it certainly did last year within the All Westcott data sets. We'll see shortly when they come out in November for the provisional, and when they come out finally in December for the final data sets. So what you're looking at when it mentions Welsh Government modelled estimate is ultimately those three arrows, and it is the points difference above or below the line. That is what the model is. It is nothing more sophisticated than that, measuring from the line of where you would expect to be. So the model is the line, your performance is where you actually are, and the plus or minus is the difference. There are some questions there for you to consider in your analysis of how do you compare against similar schools, the family average, the Wales average. What you then have is exactly the same data represented numerically. Not quite sure why there's a need for anything after the decimal place, but you've got the points values there. Then you move on to the areas and the CAP9 and the ones I referred to earlier. So those 5 measures plus the A* to A rate. And the graphs basically compare family comparison, male-female gender gaps, male-female trends over time, male-female comparison at school level, and then similarly for free school meal as well. And you've got that numbering system for those graphs are B, C, D, E, F, G across every pack with the numbers. Last year they did look a little boring because they were not line charts. Some people question whether they should be line charts anyway, and continuous data, but you've got the 4 dots for the school, the family average, the local authority in Wales. You would naturally want to go and compare the difference between the school and the family average. We will see some trends emerge in ones over time. There are some questions on the right for you to consider. You then have the charts where it's considering individual schools, and I think the key here is how is our school? Is it in roughly the middle band? Is it well above? Is it below? It's not a matter of 8th, 9th, 7th, 1st in the family. It's where you are approximately in the above the average, in line with the average, below the average, and the extent of that. And there's some questions to consider on the right as well for you. You do have gender differentials. Those can be skewed by size of cohort, and they can be skewed by, obviously, some single-sex schools remain. The interesting one moving on from these is actually, for me, the difference. So you'll see our example school, because the gender difference, minus 50 points between, what does that mean? That's boys performing 50 points lower than females on this particular indicator. However, looking at slightly different data, comparison of where the boys were on the left compared with where the family average boys were on the left, and the girls were compared with the family average for the girls on the right bar, and you will see here in both groups, both are outperforming the family is ultimately what you were intending to achieve rather than necessarily trying to close that gap. So it's how we're both comparing to their peer groups. You've then got that broken down. I'm not sure how much this adds. You've got this broken down by every school within the family. You then have exactly the same repeating patterns for free school meal versus non-free school meal trends over time. You've then got it also broken down by individual family member, and you'll see the questions are on every one of these charts. You then have those repeated, and this is a reminder for all of the main indicators, and the brackets, the letters within the brackets are consistent. What you also have are no qualifications, or there is a slight error on this example from last year in that the original data had Wales as 0, but how could that be possible when one individual school had 2.4, so that Wales data wasn't actually calculated in there, but you will see on the final data sets when they come out this year that you will have the Wales average for percentage of pupils achieving no full qualifications, where you're ultimately aiming for 0 for your school and comparing with other schools within your family. That's it in terms of Key Stage 4 analysis. I did briefly want to highlight the ALPS data that's available for every school that's post-16 and currently available for all of you. That ALPS analysis, you deal directly with ALPS in terms of uploading data, getting data from the ALPS system. Last year we offered a workshop for every school from our colleagues in ALPS to understand that in detail, and we'll look to do the same this year. But in terms of a summary, it's a reminder that ALPS is a system that is basically measuring the value added from Key Stage 4 age 16 to age 18 when they complete A-levels or relevant BTEC vocational qualifications as well, and it's also available for AS as a midpoint. There is huge caution over the indicators in 2021 and 22, where outcomes were significantly more positive than previous years because the outcomes were graded within school. There was rightly that element of adjustment that schools did for the benefit of learners who had the impact of COVID. However, we are now returning to a system where they are aligning that to outcomes in the past that these learners had, and these are learners that ultimately had at GCSE those centre determined grades as well. So degree of caution, it measures those prior outcomes for GCSE to outcomes at A-level, BTEC, based on the old UCAS point systems. It's worth a reminder that it's developed by a scientist, and the general theme is that red hot is good, blue cold is not, as high as very similar pupils in schools elsewhere in parts of the UK as well, and there are adjustments for the English between the English and Welsh systems. Ultimately, grades 1 to 3, you've matched providers in the top 25% for that indicator. 4 to 6 is in the middle, and then grades 7 to 9 mean progress in the lowest 25. You will notice that the bands are not all the same size in terms of the percentages. So you are aiming to be 1, 2, 3 red hot, or minimum of 4, 5, 6 within that middle band, and avoiding 7, 8, 9. This as a summary page, and bear in mind the ALPS packs are about 80 pages long as well. You will see the data from 2021. I'm going to focus on the 23-24 data from last year, from this year, from a pack. What I would be doing is very much looking at some of our high performing. Did we expect that? Art photography. There are only 2 learners in that group. However, there are only 3 learners in French. There is only 1 learner undertaking Turkish. That may well have been a Turkish native speaker who you are offering that A-level to. So it doesn't actually reflect on the provision within school. So you've got to be cautious of that as well. There are, however, some very large school numbers, cohort numbers here. Business studies 34, but the performance is in the lowest 25%. Maths 32 learners, performances in the bottom 15% of learners across the UK. So there are some significant questions there to ask about that, and further maths as well. You've also got psychology as a large cohort there within that lowest third. You've got a range of other subjects within the middle third, and that's where you'd expect to be B as a minimum, but it's worth having a look at those. Finally, there is an evaluation form once I've covered that off, so that if you wish, you can complete an evaluation once you've watched this video as well. It is intended just to be a reminder of the use of the All Wales core data sets, and if as ever, speak to your SIP, speak to your principal school improvement partner. If there's any technical issues as well, email Learning Intelligence, and they will of course be able to help and support secondary schools. Diolch yn fawr iawn pawb.